Frank's Red Hot is the perfect blend of flavor and heat, so you can use an entire bottle to make recipes like buffalo chicken dip or buffalo nachos, or even things that don't start with buffalo. Frank's Red Hot, I put that on everything.
Yep. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of Podcast versus Everyone. I'm Craig Powers of KookCenter.com, and with me is Jeff Newser. Jeff, say hi.
Hi.
Just a hi this week. No hi, Jeff. No smart ass anything.
Well, you didn't tell me to say hi, Jeff. Otherwise, I would have said hi, Jeff.
Oh, English teacher coming through right there. Yeah, you guys probably might hear some noises of the family in the background for me this week. That's because we were recording earlier in the day. Hey, there's a baby, crying baby. So, that delivered right away.
We did not plan that.
We did not plan that. But yeah, anyway, so I apologize for that. But actually, I don't apologize for that because I don't care.
Because we don't care.
We don't care, and
you're probably going to hate it, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, typically we're going to start out with what you're drinking, but today I want to start out with something a little special. Edgar Martinez is officially a Hall of Famer.
Woo woo!
Woo! Yeah, so I think thanks to not Mr. Tibbs, Ryan Thibodeau, the ballot tracker guy, we kind of knew it was going to happen today. Which is, for me, it makes it kind of fun to follow along the months leading up to it, seeing when he's gaining votes, all this stuff. So I think a lot of us, we weren't too surprised, but it was still really cool to hear today.
For sure. I was, it was exciting. I mean, I think after last year, it felt like, it was sort of inevitable.
Yep.
But at the same time, you kind of feel like, well, maybe not, you never really know with the baseball guys. I mean, particular one thing I was doing, kind of right before we went on, because I'd kind of forgotten, was, looking at his historic vote totals over the last 10 years and just kind of seeing how, initially he started off pretty strong, I think like 35% or something, which, was not a bad number at all for a first year, and was actually pretty encouraging, given the, people wondering if a DH was going to make it and that kind of stuff. Right. And then, as it went on a couple of years, then it dropped down to like 25%. It was like, what the heck is going on? And I think that, I think for some voters, I mean, even though they're allowed to vote for up to 10 guys, I think there are some voters that really will only vote for like 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And then, and there was a few years there with guys like Randy Johnson or whatever, guys who were, really shoe-in candidates, who I think basically you had like all these really strong guys come through over a couple of years, kind of pushed him back down the ballot. And then, as time went on, he kind of, gained strength. And then I think, definitely benefited this year from, what I would say, overall, outside of Mariano Rivera and his unanimous selection, which is just, kind of bizarre, but outside of him, you might consider it a moderately weak class. I never really thought of Roy Halladay as a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, obviously other people did, but with him. And so anyway, it's just kind of, I think he definitely benefited from, kind of sort of having to wait his turn, but awesome for him to finally get in this year.
Yeah. And I think he benefited from, in the last 10 years, you saw a lot more younger and online type writers get to the threshold where they're qualified to vote. Obviously, analytics, advanced analytics, looking at wins above replacement, things like that. Looking more at value per game and at bat rather than looking at a just tallying up stats, which I think is kind of the reason why. You'll still see guys like that get voted in by the Veterans Committee because, Harold Baines was a prime example of that. He had way more hits than Edgar, but obviously, like on a, per at bat basis, he wasn't nearly as valuable. But Edgar really, I think he benefited from that, and he benefited from kind of a great marketing push by the Mariners and a great marketing push by just Mariners fans and Edgar fans, and then the guys who did believe that he belonged in the Hall of Fame kind of really pushed for him, and it's cool to see how attitudes changed over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think people got smarter. I mean, it's when you look at a guy who had a career 418 on base percentage, and it's okay. So I mean, this may be just kind of one example, but you look at a guy like Ichiro, right? He's going to get into the Hall of Fame someday with a billion hits, but if you took hits plus walks for Ichiro, and put them together, and we're like, okay, well, how many more? And I have no idea off the top of my head, but how many more would he have than Edgar Martinez? Maybe not many more, because it's just, getting on base as people sort of realize the value of just simply getting on base, and the value of also, not necessarily just hitting a home run, the value of hitting a double or whatever. So anyway, yeah, it's kind of cool to see people just kind of getting smarter, except for Keith Olbermann, who is, whatever. I have no idea what his problem is with Edgar Martinez, particularly if you have no problem voting for relievers. I don't know why you would have a problem voting for a DH who actually plays in more innings than a reliever does. But at any rate, good for Edgar, good for baseball people sort of getting smarter about what actually adds value to a baseball game. And just, pretty awesome day for Mariners fans to get a guy who we don't have to share with anybody else. I heard somebody put it that way today, that it's a guy we don't have to share. He was ours the whole time, and he's still ours alone. So pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. I'm not gonna lie, I shed a few tears this afternoon. It was pretty awesome. It was just one of those moments that I've been waiting for, and like you said, it looked like it was kind of never going to happen for a bit. But anyway, so I'll segue into what you're drinking. I have my beer definitely has a lot to do with what we just talked about, so I'll let you start, Jeff. What you drinking?
Yeah, so I am not drinking again. I'm still keto, so I am not drinking tonight. But I did drink on Sunday while I was playing poker, and with my buddies. And I had a crowler from Skookum. Last week I said I was going to drink the worldwide stout, the vanilla bourbon barrel aged worldwide stout. I decided not to do that because I was over at somebody's house and wanted to be able to not crash my car. So I drank part of the crowler. I actually shared it with somebody because, again, was not prepared to drink an entire 32-ounce can of beer. So I drank Zero Visibility by Skookum, which is a hazy IPA. And I mentioned last week that I really like hazy IPAs are sort of my favorite style. What's interesting about this one is that, a lot of the, kind of more trendy hazy IPAs are extremely citrusy, almost sort of a very kind of almost like a crushable type drink. Like it's just so nice and easy drinking. This is, it definitely has those citrusy notes, but is a little more bitter on the back end, like a traditional IPA. So it's kind of this really, I don't know, it's just this really fun beer that's got these sort of the just enough bitterness on the back end to kind of make you think of more of a traditional West Coast IPA. It's very good.
Yeah, Skookum is an awesome brewery. I know that when you go north, you stop there, pick up crowlers, leave your kids in the car.
Yep.
Cool. That's one of the bummers is a lot of kids in the brewery, and you kind of have to drive. If you're down south like us, you kind of have to drive pretty far north to get to them. And Hollis Wood, he's kind of an old school OG Seattle beer nerd. He's the head brewer, and he's an awesome guy, and he's just an awesome brewer. Pretty much everything they crank out is on point. And the interesting thing about Skookum is Hollis has brewed there for coming on like 8 or 9 years now, and he wasn't really putting out anything that was kind of blowing anyone's minds off, like blowing anyone's minds, like for long until about 3 years ago. He put out this hazy IPA called Billowing Waves. And even though Skookum's been around for so long that, they were kind of just making this Amber's Hot Friend, they were making kind of basic IPAs and stuff, doing essentially the cheaper beers to make. But basically he earned the trust of the owners of the brewery to be able to buy more expensive, ingredients. So like these hazy IPAs have a kind of a bigger hop bill because you're dry hopping a lot. They're more expensive, sort of newer designer type hops often, and the grain bill is a little different. You're using like oats and things like that. So there's more specialty grains in there, and so these cost a lot more to make, and he's sort of gotten them to let him do that, to do bourbon barrel aged barley wines and stouts, and it's really cool. And now, Skookum is really one of the best breweries in Washington, and putting out some of the coolest stuff, and stuff that, every time I see them on tap, I think that's the first thing that I told you a long time ago, like, hey, if you see a Skookum, always try the Skookum, right? And so, go Hollis Wood, go Skookum. Jeff, how would you rate that on our Gardner Minshew scale?
So given the bitterness on the back end of the finish on that, I would go ahead and put it at let's go with Gardner Minshew's pass to Aesop Winston to beat Utah for all the salt to the Utes. So it's like this bitterness for them that's a pleasant finish for me.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful rating. Also, one of the best plays of the season. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Which is fitting for Skookum. So, my beer, I put, as you know, I'm probably going to put often way too much thought into these beers. So my beer is definitely tied to Edgar's election today to the Hall of Fame. So as you know, Edgar's first year. Okay, so let me rewind a bit. Last episode, I said I drank a beer from 2009, and then I said, I think my oldest beer in my cellar is from 2012 now. Oh, and that is wrong. I'll issue a correction. Fake news. I'm sorry, guys. I went back and I looked at my spreadsheet, and I found out that I had a beer from 2005, and I had this beer from 2010. They're actually the same beer, just bottled different years. So it's called Goose Jardin. Jardin is a lambic producer from Belgium. So lambic is spontaneously fermented beer, which means they kind of leave the beer out to be fermented by natural yeast. And then for a goose, they throw it into oak barrels or foeders and then blend, 3 years of that. So it takes a long time to make this beer. So this beer requires a lot of patience to make. And Edgar's Hall of Fame election required a lot of patience. And this goose style, it actually was super out of vogue in the 80s. A lot of these goose makers, even the ones that are world renowned now, were for example, Cantillon. They're one of the true always to traditional style lambic producers. They don't produce like the back sugared ones that you see from Lindemans. They're always going to do that traditional style, and they nearly went out of business in the 80s. They had to open up a museum of goose in Brussels, and essentially what Jean Valmois, the head brewer, has said is like, if we didn't have that museum of goose, we would have went out of business. And he said he had to beg people to buy his beer. Like he had to beg bars to put it on tap. He had to because it was such an unpopular style. And then this guy named Michael Jackson, not the singer, he was a famous beer blogger who is now dead, but he went on these tours of Belgium, would drink all the beer, and he basically sang the praises of these lambic styles. And so by the 90s, they have become more in favor, and now they're like these super sought-after beers. I know I've shared a few with you, Jeff, especially I've shared a few of the Cantillons with you.
Yep.
Those are super. Those don't sit on the shelves in the U.S. Not that much comes to the U.S., but if you put it on a shelf, it'll be gone in a second. So it's not. So it's funny how it's similar to Edgar. He started off well. Like he was a style that people committed to. 36% on his first one, but then about 2015, it looked like his Hall of Fame thing was dead in the water, and then he had this resurgence over recent years. And then this Goose Jardin one, they're not like the highest end, highest sought after goose producer, but they make some excellent ones. And You can find them in the U.S. At finer beer shops, seasonally when they come out. I can't tell you when they usually come out. It's kind of random. Whenever Shelton Brothers, I think, brings them over. But I'd highly recommend. They're usually a little bit of price, a little bit easier to obtain than some of the high-end ones like Cantillon or Driefontein. How I'm going to rate this beer on the Gardner Minshew scale. So I'm thinking about Gardner put up great numbers against Oregon State this year. Just 5 touchdowns, 400-ish yards. It had an easy time. So on paper it looked great. But actually, if you look at Luke Falk's numbers against Oregon State, he tore them apart. Like 4-0 and I think he threw for 22 touchdown passes in 4 games or whatever. So beating up on Oregon State is just a great and fun thing, just a great style. But Gardner Minshew wasn't necessarily the like best style of it. Gardner Minshew's Oregon State wasn't necessarily the best, but it's just one of many of a delicious style and easy to access now because that video is pretty easy to access on YouTube. So yeah, so that's what I'm drinking. Some goose.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, it is 10 years old, and it is drinking quite well. What goose will do. Goose is made to age, really. There's kind of some live yeast still in the bottle. It'll take on different characteristics as it ages. Like a lot of the goose I'll put on the best on date will be 20 years out. So I have a few that I'm trying to save. And I got one that's already 14 years old on this, which I didn't acquire 14 years ago when I was 20, but I've since acquired it. So yeah, this is excellent. It's gotten really funked up, so it's got a lot of that. You can taste the Flanders region of Belgium in it.
Love that.
Yeah, and so it's delicious. And I know you've had. I've shared some of these with you, and I know you've enjoyed them as well.
I have.
So yeah, that's what we're drinking. And not quite the big beer that I had last week. So it's a smaller bottle and much less alcohol. It's earlier in the night.
Yeah, sometimes those are really good combinations.
Yeah. So I want to transition to the part where I wish I had stronger alcohol, is where we talk about WSU. So usually WSU is, we're going to talk about basketball a lot, but Ken Wilson, one of our prized assistants, has now moved on to Oregon, where several other Leach assistants have moved on recently. Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it sucks.
Yeah.
like this is terrible. I know it's kind of what I wrote in the story, but just to say that he was a guy who was really sort of seemed like our most valuable recruiter on defense. Was really key in landing a lot of defensive lineman, linebacker types. Just a high energy dude. Was the longest tenured guy on staff. He joined the staff from Nevada after Leach's first year. So, just a guy who's been through a lot of this success, and you always want to keep guys like that around. But it's coaching profession's hard, and if you get a better opportunity, you got to take it. And I'm sure for him, nothing's come out as far as terms or anything like that. But the other guys who've left for Oregon, and this is the 4th year in a row, Oregon has taken a WSU assistant, which is sort of bananas.
Yeah.
Every single one of those guys has moved on with a pay raise and or an increase in responsibilities. So you can't fault him for that. The life of an assistant coach is tough. And I'm sure when he was grinding it out at Nevada, he probably dreamed of the day when he could recruit to a place like Oregon and their facilities and everything else there. So I don't blame the guy. I have no ill will whatsoever. It sucks. I wish he'd stayed, and I think it's viable to sort of feel both of those things.
Yeah, and he'll get to experience what it's like to lose to WSU on a yearly basis now. So that's good for him.
He'll have good company with Joe Salvea and Jim Mastro.
Yeah. So I decided to look at his Twitter. He's one of the few coaches I followed on Twitter that hadn't blocked me. uh, so he had, he's got his all his profile is Ken Wilson, or he's coach at University of Oregon, blah blah blah, all that. So I look on his pinned tweet. His link, by the way, is still WSUCougars.com. Even though he's got like an Oregon helmet as his avatar and all that stuff, and he says he's the Oregon linebackers coach, and so I look at his pin tweet. It's from 2016, and he's flying. It's a picture from an airplane of Pullman. It said, "I'm leaving Pullman, a beautiful day. There's no better place to be, no better school to go to in the U.S." And so I had to have a little fun with it. I screen grabbed that. I poked fun at him on Twitter, and Cougs seemed to be enjoying that. So it's really nice to have a coach of another program talking about how you're the best place to be. So that's always fun, and also
definitely a recruiting advantage right there.
Yep. Yeah. I think I'd be using that if I was at WSU. Look, our coach thinks this is the best place. So
yeah, I'd be able to put that to good use.
Yeah, and so let's move on to talking about, once again, our most favorite sport in the world, Washington State University basketball. Hey, we won this weekend.
Kinda. I mean, they did, but they played Cal.
I mean, so how bad is Cal? Like, oh my God.
Cal's really bad. Cal is like fire your coach right now bad. Like,
and we're fire you coach right now bad.
Yeah, and so are we. And so like we know it when we see it, right? like if you're, we as we talked about last week, we definitely spend a fair amount of time looking at just sort of basic basketball analytics. And one of the things I like about basketball analytics is they're pretty accessible. If you just like spend more than if you're willing to spend more than 30 seconds thinking about it, it's pretty accessible. Most of the stats are rate based, which means percentages. And I would hope to God that most of you listening would be able to understand percentages, right? And so the other one is things per something, right? So the big measure of offense and defense is how many points either you score or allow per possession. And then of course Ken Pomeroy makes one final step, which is adjusting it for the level of opponent, right? So Cal's defense, we talked about this last week, but I just kind of want to drive home kind of the point here. Cal's defense is ranked 336th in Division One in adjusted defensive efficiency. Like they are quite literally almost the worst defense in Division One, and frankly, that should be impossible if you have high major or even mid-major athletes on your roster. Even Ernie Kent's defense isn't that bad.
Right.
So that's where I'm like, man, if your defense is that putrid, that's like I said, that's like fire your coach on the spot type stuff. And Ernie Kent just ought to be thanking his lucky stars that King Jones exists. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure he'd be staring at a winless Pac-12 season this year.
Yep. So yes, Cal's terrible. Beat the hell out of them. It almost feels like they were saving Franks to come back for that game and not come back for Utah because he really wants. Make sure you get the one that you can get, right? Exactly. And Franks looked kind of like a man among boys when he wanted to, and which a big thing about him is that he always doesn't always want to. He looked pretty. He had a pretty easy 22 points, and everyone had a pretty easy 81 points, and it was even the Cal's offense looked terrible. Like to make WSU's defense look decent, like it just they're in a bad place, and it's really bad. Yeah, and it's Cal's kind of this, you expect them to have, have more money, all this stuff, but they're probably one of the institutions that is in worse financial shape than we are even, and it's really kind of shown, I think, recently in their athletics and football and basketball, especially in the real money athletics, and so it's nice. They can be the one team that we beat, and then of course Stanford came along, and that was actually a game that you were thinking maybe they had a chance, but again, like Stanford kind of, truly like kind of kept them at arm's length most of the second half, and we saw kind of them have, you saw the talent disparity and everything kind of come to play in the second half. There wasn't, I watched the game and I didn't really feel like WSU was really threatening all that much. Like they just didn't have quite enough to get over the top against Stanford.
Well, and Ken Pomeroy would definitely agree with you. I'm looking at the win probability graph. So for those of you that don't know what a win probability graph is, it basically just at any point in the game, given the score and given the quality of the two teams, what's the likelihood that, a certain team is going to win? And so WSU's win probability was never above 50% after the 9-minute mark of the first half. So that was the only time at which it was like, okay, they're sort of even just very slightly favored to win it. And even when they closed within 5 with, like whatever was 3.5 minutes left, that still only dropped Stanford's win probability to 84%. So it was kind of what you said. Like they kind of were seemingly kind of getting close, and it just, like you said, it never really felt like it was ever actually close to getting over the hump. And, it's, it's what happens when you play a team that, Stanford's defensive strength is denying 3-point shots. Mm-hmm. Craig and I talk about this all the time as sort of a basic tenet of 3-point defense. Most of the time people look at 3-point defense as what's the percentage that you allow. Ken Pomeroy did a pretty long study on 3-point defense, and really, again, you probably don't want to read the whole thing, so I'll boil it down for you. Essentially, the only 3-pointer you can truly affect is the one that the other team never takes. And so really good 3-point defense actually prevents teams from shooting threes. And once teams shoot a 3, then it's kind of out of your hands, because teams often pass up contested threes, right? So most of the threes that teams take are open or semi-open. Mm-hmm. So when a shot is not open, then teams aren't taking them. So Stanford's opponents had one of the lowest 3-point ratios of 3-point shots to 2-point shots. And so WSU, of course, being one of the leaders in the country of highest ratios of 3-point shots to 2-point shots, it was kind of like, okay, these two styles, well, Stanford's style, particularly in the second half, really won out, and WSU just didn't really have, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, really any other strategies for attacking Stanford. And it seemed like they just kind of withered away until they started shooting some desperation threes and, hit one and, to kind of get close, but not really.
Yeah. And so basically in summation, WC is not that good. But an interesting thing that you pointed out to me, I don't know where you got the little tidbit from, but someone pointed out the rebounding margin.
Oh, yes. WSU lost the rebounding battle.
So this is going to bring us into our first of a periodic segment, which we'll call That Stat Doesn't Mean What You Think It Means. So rebounding margin, as kind of points per possession stuff, has actually taken hold pretty well around, and KenPom has taken hold pretty well. Like in a lot of broadcasts you see kind of efficiency mentioned casually, but rebounding margin is still kind of the most dominant rebounding stat that you see. So Jeff, break it down. I believe they were out rebounded by 6 or something like that.
Yeah, so somebody, said, "Oh, WSU lost the rebounding battle, and that's part of where they lost the game." And they really didn't, because as I started looking at again, we're talking percentages here, right? Rate-based stats, defensive rebounding and offensive rebounding percentages. So we look at those as a function of the total number of rebounds available, right? What percentage of the available rebounds did they get. And you want to a lot of times look at it in terms of offensive and defensive, because those really are two different skill sets, right? I mean, think about
and
what makes,
strategy
yeah,
as well.
in strategy as well. Yeah. So what makes a great defensive rebounder? The ability to box out. A lot of times your best rebounders are big bodied guys, right? Guys like Aaron Baines, who was a dominant defensive rebounder. And then you think of who are your elite offensive rebounders? Well, those are often guys who are kind of skinnier and springier, and they have the ability to slither into tight spaces and get their hands on balls, things like that. So number one, different skill sets. And then number two, it's a function of opportunity, right? So Craig just mentioned that, style plays into it to some degree. So, you've got Tony Bennett teams, which we're all very well aware, just decided we're not even going to try an offensive rebound unless we already happen to be under the basket. Otherwise, everybody else drops back to prevent transition. Okay. And then you got other teams. If anybody ever watches Frank Martin at South Carolina, I mean, they just go absolutely bonkers crashing the offensive glass. So different style strategy. And then beyond that, it's a function of opportunity for example, defensive rebounding percentage. How many shots did the other team miss, right? So like you can't get a lot of offense or defensive rebounds just in raw number if the other team doesn't miss many shots. And then vice versa, if you're missing a ton of shots, the other team is naturally going to have more rebounds just because. So that was the case in this game, when in actuality, so even though the raw numbers said, Stanford was the dominant rebounding team, in terms of percentages, Stanford's defensive rebounding percentage was 79.5%. So they got 79.5 or 80% of the misses that WSU had. WSU got 79.2 of Stanford's misses. So basically it was basically a tie. Like it was dead even. And the only thing that accounted for the difference was simply WSU missed a bunch more shots, which was reflected in their 66 points over, I don't know how many possessions, 71 possessions, which is awful. And that's how Stanford ends up with more rebounds. So if you want to be a smarter basketball fan, and you really want to kind of know kind of how a team really did rebounding, first of all, break it up, offensive, defensive rebounding percentage, and then look at the percentage and see, who was really gobbling up the larger percentage of shots. That gives you a much more accurate picture of who was more dominant on the glass. And then if you want to read up on it just a tiny bit, John Gassaway, a guy that Craig and I used to write with at Basketball Prospectus, did a post somewhere, sometime, I can't remember for who he did it, but called Rebounding Margin Must Die. So you can read that, and he does a better job of explaining it than I did.
Yeah, and so basically to summarize, the reason why rebounding margin isn't what you think it is because there's a lot of factors that play into that margin that have nothing to do with rebounding, such as turnovers and missed shots that will limit the opportunities for one team to grab defensive rebounds. I'll point out that if you're playing defense and you're forcing a lot of turnovers, you're going to get less defensive rebounds because the other team is taking less shots. So there's just a lot of factors into rebounding margin. It really shouldn't be something that's taken as a whole. It should be split into defensive and offensive because there's so much that goes into the strategy and the skill sets. And so basically that's what we're saying. That's kind of our first segment on that stat. What doesn't mean when you think it means. We're going to continue being annoying about the stats that we like and telling you why the stats that you like are stupid. And so expect more of that. Before we move on out of WSU, I wanted to point out that last week I kind of outed you as a Christian man, Jeff, which I feel bad about that because I didn't even talk about my own religious beliefs, and I'm going to say it. I am actually a Claytheist because Klay Thompson's shooting form is the most pure thing in the universe, which he had on display last night, hitting his first 10 three-pointers, tying an NBA record, going 10 of 11 overall. He's had some struggles shooting this year, but he's still, that pure form will break him out of any slump anytime, and I think makes him probably one of the Steph might have better overall percentages, but I don't think anyone shoots like Klay when he gets hot.
No, it's the most repeatable shooting form I think in the entire world. honestly. And one of these days, you and I, we're going to have to do a little Tony Bennett fanfic and imagine what might have happened if Tony Bennett had never left, and just kind of what where we might be right now if Tony had just stuck around for like, I don't know, 3 more years, something like that. Because it's not hard to imagine a world in which WSU basketball is very different if he had somehow stuck around and really gotten the most out of Clay, and not that Ken Bone didn't get the most out of Clay. I think Ken Bone did a good job with him, but just Clay as a centerpiece of a team coached by Tony Bennett, I think would be a lot of fun. Would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So yes, if you want to know more about the Church of Claytheism, there's some info online. Just go ahead and Google it. It's I truly believe in it, and but I don't want to preach too much. I hate that. So to do something that's even more kind of cringy, we're going to move on into talking about some politics. So if you hate that, this section's called Coastal Elites, so you can guess where we align. Go ahead and either fast forward to when we're talking about pop culture or whatever, or just turn it off right now if you just wanted to hear us talk about WSU and beer and Edgar. So yeah, let's move on into our Coastal Elites segment. Jeff, I would say this isn't the most important political thing of the week, but it's certainly the most viral, which was this interaction with some Covington Catholic high school students with some Native Americans at March for Life in DC. So, Jeff, kind of when you saw that video initially, what were your thoughts?
It's kind of hard to describe exactly what I was feeling. Mostly just, I guess I was embarrassed for those kids. And I felt honestly, a little bit of shame as an educator. I would just, I don't know, I watched it and just thought why, it just, there are so many things right now that do just sort of make me think that particular thing, why is this happening? Why do these kids think this is amusing, right? And I mean, and I have some sense of why. I've done enough studying of sort of racial dynamics and power dynamics and things like that to kind of understand why it happens, when you've got dominant white kids and the privilege that they enjoy, to look down their nose at someone, a teenager in particular, sort of looking in that way towards someone who's older than him, and because he's Native, just the inherent superiority in that, and so I understand why, but just the part that gets me, sort of crushes me to my soul, is it just feels unnecessary, and it feels heartbreaking that that's still a thing, right? That we haven't moved past this,
Right.
This point at which we can just sort of be like, yeah, that's cool, man. They're marching for that. That's neat, and even if, and I know I'm sure you're going to get into this, this whole got to hear both sides thing that apparently is taking place at the moment, even if you believe that somehow, the Native American, the indigenous people's march, invaded their space or something, their reaction just sort of says everything. You're looking at a bunch of smirking white teenagers in MAGA hats, basically doing their MAGA thing. And it's, and really, it's heartbreaking and disgusting, and just, it really just underscores, as an educator, why I do what I do, in the hopes that, the kids that leave my classroom wouldn't behave in a similar fashion.
Well, yeah, and you kind of talked about since the initial reaction, you see there was this other side put out, and kind of what you'll see is, you'll see people say, these kids were just singing along with them, or they were just trying to have a good time with them. They were singing the songs. Well, I don't know how often you watched a group of teenage boys. Those were not the looks on their faces were not, you know, of genuine enjoyment and involvement in the song, the songs that that man was playing. So that there's the look on their faces, the way they're dancing around in quite a mocking fashion. Like there was an article on Deadspin, which, whatever you think of Deadspin, admittedly they have some crap on there, but they also have some pretty good things. Excuse me. Basically, it said, don't be afraid to believe, what your eyes saw, and because what we've seen is in the coming days, you've seen a lot of journalists kind of walk back their original reaction because they're they want to be seen as neutral and playing both sides, and a lot of this is driven by a PR firm that was basically hired, and this is why you're seeing the kid go on like a media tour now. And Jeff, you've been a journalist. It was sports, and I've been a journalist in technology. When you're a journalist, you get all sorts of emails and messages from PR firms wanting to drive the message in your writing, wanting to drive the message in whatever you're doing. And for me, one of the key things is sort of not letting that happen as a journalist. You'll see a lot of journalists that are just straight up rude to PR firms because they're so aggressive about trying to get you to talk about what they want to talk about. And I think for me, what I see happening is these journalists are falling into what the PR firm wants them to talk about. And the PR firm doesn't care about the both sides. They care about one side. They care about, defending the kids. And so, and the school or whatever, and it's frustrating for me as like I very recently a journalist who dealt with PR emails constantly, and you had to pick and choose which stories made sense, and you had PR people trying to look over your shoulder when you're writing an article essentially and trying to guide, are you sure? Did you have to say that? You don't need to say that. You don't need to ask that question, blah, blah, blah. And it's frustrating that we've kind of come to this point where a PR firm is now driving this narrative and not what, people are seeing, not what people are reporting on. It's really the PR firm and who have, they have a dog in the race and they're protecting a client. And that's what they're doing. They're not trying to paint an accurate picture. They're just trying to protect their client. And that's really frustrating that a lot of the journalists have taken into that message. But I think it says something bigger about kind of where we've been with the messaging on in a lot of media now. We've seen for the last at least since like initial Rush Limbaugh, Newt Gingrich type era, this kind of attack on the liberal media, and which there's some truth to some liberalism in media, but it's more of the kind of natural definition of liberal, which is just being open-minded to what's going around. Journalism at its core is to be the voice of the voiceless. So being driven by a PR firm with someone who has a lot of money to put a message out there, that's not quite the voiceless. A Native American man in a marginalized community, that's often the voiceless. Not necessarily that the journalist has to take that side, but we still have to report accurately. So now you'll see things like CNN employing Corey Lewandowski and having him on every panel, and he's what are his qualifications? He was a campaign manager for Donald Trump, and so he's now a political analyst on or has been a political analyst on CNN. And so we're seeing a lot of things like that, and it's getting frustrating. Jeff, I know you and I have talked about this before. This kind of like having to have the token other side, which then kind of creates this belief that both sides have valid arguments.
Yeah, I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of objectivity is what it is. It's the Deadspin piece that you referenced, I think put it really well. It's almost become a sort of almost a form of virtue signaling where you say, oh, I have been open-minded and listened to both sides on this. And if you say, oh man, I rushed to judgment and now I'm sort of rethinking that, I mean, it becomes sort of, like I said, this virtue signaling where you're like, oh, look at me, I'm very level-headed and objective, and I have now weighed all of the evidence. And it's like, you know what I mean? Sometimes the evidence is the evidence, right? Like it's not, this isn't something where we need another side. Like it is what it is. I mean, I remember, to kind of bring this around to a related topic, and the fear of actually just calling something what it is. I feel like this really kicked into overdrive in the coverage of Trump leading up to the 2016 election, candidate Trump, right?
Right.
Where he would they had never dealt with a candidate before who would just so blatantly lie. And they had no idea how to deal with that, right? And so they're used to covering an election in a way where you cover this side and you cover this side and you give them equal time. And sure, both sides are sort of, fudging the truth and they're trying to twist things to make it look, but everybody's sort of like, playing by the same rules. Well, all of a sudden here comes this guy who's not playing by any rules other than his own. And they never, ever, ever really dealt with that. They felt like, okay, well, the way we normally do this is we kind of try and give candidates equal time. So we're going to, cover this. And they never really dealt with what it meant to be objective, which is to just say, no, that thing over there, that's actually bullshit. And that's not true. And that's a lie. And just say it's a lie, and then you get things like, Jamel Hill, Sports Center anchor who gets on Twitter and gets in all kinds of trouble for saying Donald Trump is a white supremacist. Like, how is that controversial? like every bit of everything that's come out of his mouth and every bit of policy he's put forward is a white supremacist agenda. And then beyond that, we get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying Donald Trump's a racist. And oh my God, I can't believe she said that about the president. I'm like, but the president is a racist. Like all of the evidence points at this. So look, if you want to say, I like a president who supports a white supremacist agenda and, that promotes the white race above other races. And you want to say that, look, I support a racist president. I'm not racist. Okay, fine. But you support a racist president. If you want to say it, then fine, but that's what it is. And so let's not try and pretend that we're being objective by saying, well, I mean, maybe he's not racist. Is he really a white supremacist? Let's, the evidence is in, like the verdict is in. This is what it is, and so just own it. And if you're uncomfortable with that, then maybe examine your own views.
Right. Yeah. And I don't want to belabor the point too much longer, but it's just. I think there's been we've talked often enough about this kind of the conservative media has really won and the Republicans have won the messaging over the past couple decades, and now I think there's this legitimate fear, especially if you're not in like a super left-leaning media, and if you're in one of the big guys. CNN or NPR or something, or CBS, anywhere, you're afraid to kind of stir the pot too much, and because you're just going to get this huge backlash, because the messaging has been drawn up so well that anything, the point where you point out things that are obvious, like Donald Trump lying. Donald Trump saying racist things, then you suddenly are you're being biased and you're fake news, and that's kind of the point we've reached. And Facebook certainly helped with that. It'll be interesting. It's interesting to me how they like to play that they're not a news organization, but they certainly are. But I don't want to really get into that. Maybe we'll for another day. But yeah, so great points, Jeff. And it's something that I think to each of our cores impacts us because of work we've done and studying and everything like that. But yeah, we'll move on to something probably even more controversial. And so last week in our pop culture segment, we kind of were freewheeling it. just trying to see what's going on in the world, and we stumbled upon the Billboard Hot 100, and we noticed 3 out of the top 13 songs were in some part including this guy named Post Malone, which to me, Jeff, I don't know, when I think Post Malone, I think purple and gold jersey, kind of the mid '90s conference finals. John Stockton. I think kind of a drop step to the baseline layup type Post Malone. I don't know if that's where he got his name, but that's Karl Malone is what comes to mind when I hear Post Malone.
Yeah, or is this is this like after Malone? Is he like some sort of post after incarnation of himself? I mean, these are the important questions we need answers to.
Well, in looking at pictures of him, if it has lost a considerable amount of height and added some face tattoos and
Face tattoos
as well, because Karl Malone, even in his by the end of his NBA career, was a real buff guy, and Post Malone is
not a buff guy.
Not a buff guy. So Jeff, you kind of brought up the homework assignment, since you are the teacher of the two of us, of us both going to listen to some Post Malone and gather some of our well thought out opinions of his music and why he is so very popular. So Jeff, I want to hear, how much did you listen to him, and kind of what were you thinking? What's your initial thoughts? And then I know you kind of tapped into some youths to get some thoughts. So let me hear it.
Yeah, so probably unlike all of our 160 listeners from the last week, who have probably never listened to Post Malone, I listened to like 2.5 hours of Post Malone last night.
Wow.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to make sure I had a good sort of sampling of what he does and what his music is, and because if you just listen to a few popular songs, you don't always get a good sense of what the artist is doing. And I try to be open-minded about music. I mean, I like most people, I'm pretty set in the stuff that I really like, which is the stuff that we listen to when we're in high school and college, right? So for me, that's grunge, that's classic rock, because that's what I was into. So this guy, for people who don't know, Post Malone is it's even kind of hard to describe. I mean, I guess just like most plainly, you describe him as a rapper.
Yeah.
Because he is a rapper, but he's kind of a little bit different than that. There's definitely some musicality to the beats. It's not just beats. It's there's some instrumentals to it. So anyway, he kind of rides this line between rap and pop music, and which I think is part of what explains why he's so popular. He comes up with these sort of catchy beats / melodies, and then does kind of this rap singing thing with them. But my biggest takeaway from listening to him was, like, all the songs sound the same, man, and they're kind of depressing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I put that was my first takeaway.
So yeah, I didn't listen 2.5 hours. I probably listened about an hour of him.
That's just because I'm a better student than you are.
Yeah, you're a better student. But I had found out I had heard a couple of his songs before, which is not that surprising. You flip through the channels and you hear something. There were some catchy tunes that I know I probably thought, oh, this isn't so bad. Not knowing it's Post Malone, because I really didn't know what Post Malone was. And yeah, I kind of was like, I was expecting a rapper. And yeah, it's kind of like this sing rap thing that, Drake sort of does sometimes, but he more traditionally raps as well. I was kind of surprised at what to hear. But to your point, I'm not surprised that he's popular, because actually a lot of the beats are, they're pleasant and they're easy to dance to. My little daughter, who likes to dance to everything, honestly, but especially if it's got a nice beat, she was shaking her hips. And as a side note, when we use the Amazon Alexa for a lot of the um, music we listen to, and so we'll just say we have computer as our way to tell it to come on. And so, I say computer, play some music, and she'll she's 14 months old. She's now figured out. She looks at it and she gets really excited and she kind of starts dancing when she sees the light. She sees the light come on. But anyway, so that's beside the point. But anyway, so yeah, some really catchy beats, a lot of repeated sort of choruses and words, which makes, it's the type of thing that gets stuck in your head. I think the type of thing that the Black Eyed Peas mastered, unlike any other group, of just repeating the same thing over and over again. So he repeats his choruses quite a bit, and he in very, very catchy beats, and he's got kind of this kind of pleasant, non-threatening voice. He does, he does swear, and he swear to sound old. I mean, he says fuck, and he talks about, some kind of topics that you don't want your little kid listening to, but also he's top 40 music, so that stuff just gets bleeped out anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, I was surprised. There was one I listened to that I recognized, and I realized I saw it like in this. It was from the new Spider-Man movie, which I haven't seen, but I saw a video with this song in the background, not knowing what the song was, and I thought it was just like a little short movie, and I thought it was pretty cool, and because the song fit it pretty well. I couldn't name which one it is right now, honestly, but
Sunflower.
Yeah,
Sunflower. I learned all about Sunflower today.
Yep. So it made a cool little Spider-Man video with it and stuff, and so I was like, that's one I've heard, and then there was another couple I've heard, and yeah, his stuff is, it's definitely top 40 type music. It's just, and like you said, it's not super easy to define other than pop music, like because he's not really rapping. He's more kind of sing talking, I guess you should say. And there's definitely some autotune in there. And he is, which autotune's very popular with hip hop now, so it's not that weird. I think it's kind of an evolution of things that you've seen in kind of pop music, because there's a lot more kind of hip hop type elements in pop music than maybe when we were younger. So that's kind of a style that's taken over, even if it's, I kind of think so. This takes me back like college. So if you just take a nice beat over and you put a nice beat that's got some danceability to it, but also kind of has this kind of cool factor where it's not like super happy. It's more of a party vibe. I think when I was in like middle school, there was a song called "Like a Bird" or something, or high school, like a Bird from Nelly Furtado, where it's this very poppy, girly song, like "I'm like a bird."
Yeah.
And so, but by my like senior year of college, Nelly Furtado came out with another album, and it was she hooked up with this producer called Timbaland, and it was just these like kind of really dark beats, these kind of dancing club type beats, a little bit hip hop influenced, and this Like a Bird girl is singing more about like her sexuality and about relationships and everything like that, and you're like, who the hell is this? Like, and just that's kind of the influence a certain beat can have on a track and on the artist, and that's immediately made me think of that, like, yeah, like this is totally like a lot of what his songs are super driven by that, like kind of that background instrumentalization, because there's even some like acoustic guitar in there. It's like pretty weird, like it's different than what I expected. I don't hate it, but I don't think it's particularly awesome. I didn't rush to like download it and listen to it more. I have heard from friends that are like really into hip hop and stuff that he is the worst. I'm not that passionate about it, so I don't really care. I'm like, yeah, it's pleasant. If it came on the radio, I probably wouldn't switch it away right away. I don't have any strong feelings about it either way, which is kind of a really perfect way to kind of find your way into a top 40 and have like
Yeah.
13 songs.
Right. Make sure nobody has any strong feelings one way or the other. Yeah, I mean, I kind of put it to my students today. So I went to the experts on rap music, which is my senior English classes. I asked all three of them. I said, I have a very, very serious, important question for you, and they all looked at me, very intently, and I gravely said, why do y'all like Post Malone? So anyway, so we kicked off this discussion, and I think that a couple things stuck out. One is so I kind of made the connection to when I was in high school. I mentioned, I child of the '90s, Seattle grunge, all that stuff, and one of the reasons why that music resonated is the early '90s were sort of this very angsty time in general, and then of course you resonate with teenagers and young 20 somethings who of course are going through all the growing pains of those ages, and so then when Kurt Cobain is out there being his depressed self, like everybody's like, yeah, he totally gets me, right? I got that same vibe from the students today when I was talking with them, like, oh man, it's just his lyrics. The beat. I just love the vibe, man. He just gets me. And I'm like, so I can kind of understand on that level, kind of where that is. And then I think the other part is that, and this is, again, I did a little research. I wanted to kind of see what other people thought about why he was popular. And one of the things they pointed out was that, in an era of streaming music where we don't necessarily listen to entire albums and where we don't necessarily value a range of musical abilities over the course of 12 unique songs, in an era where you can just pick a couple songs, drop it on your playlist and be like, yeah dude, Post Malone is awesome, that sort of thing. I think that sort of plays into it too, where you've got a few songs that are catchy and you like, and so you play those songs, and that's how, my God, he had one song that had 1.4 billion with a B plays on Spotify. I was just like, what? I was like, holy crap, So anyway, I think that's part of it too. So when you've got an artist whose music all sounds sort of very similar, and that's not even like a huge knock. I mean, I look, I prefer my favorite musicians to have a range of musical abilities, but I'm also not, I'm not above listening to just some punk rock. Listen to the Ramones, and listen, I will fight any person who tries to say the Ramones were super diverse in their musical ability. It's like, come on, it's like that's what they were, and that's what punk rock was. And so it's okay. So, I kind of am leaning towards the idea that Post Malone is, kind of 2019's grunge rock, punk rock thing.
Well, yeah, yeah, I don't think it seems, I often think about that kind of like when grunge rock was top 40.
Right.
I wonder if that was kind of the last hurrah for like rock and roll type, like to be the regular top 40. And now it's kind of a more pop focused type thing. That was I think about it, it was such a unique time, like just to have like this kind of weird, like kind of more sad music come out from Seattle,
Yeah.
and that becomes what every kid in Minnesota loves, like,
Right.
But yeah, anyway, so that's beside the point. But yeah, so Post Malone, we could say he's in the Post Malone era.
Yeah.
It's really and really exemplifies that. So yeah, I give him one Post Malone's out of one Post Malone's rating. Um,
Yeah.
and honestly, like it's fine. I don't care. But
Yeah.
listen,
I mean, I would throw a couple of his songs in my playlist
yeah,
if I didn't have an 11-year-old, 9-year-old, and 6-year-old
yeah,
who were always listening to music with me. So
yeah,
that's sort of my verdict.
yeah. Before we move on, you talked about how your kids just say really gets you, which is little funny. These
Right.
like 17-year-olds from not like semi-rural Washington or like
Right.
yeah, he gets
Right.
okay, sure.
Sure.
Uh, but I when I was in Nashville and I worked at a group home and I had these kids who their defining characteristic in life is that they wanted to be hard. And so like they just had to be hard and they respected other people that were super hard about where they went and where they're from and what they've experienced and how they act and that was right about the time that Drake started getting like he kind of came out with his first single and I used to just rip on the kids all the time because I'd be like, what I knew Drake from back in the day was a little show called Degrassi, and he played, not such a. I mean, he did get shot in the back on that show, so it was a little bit hard. But I'm like, this guy grew up in the suburbs of Toronto.
Right.
Probably not like. I mean, go ahead and idolize him, but I don't think he's exactly the type of like guy that you guys claim to want to be. But they would always kind of sheepishly say, I know, but I just like it, man. His beats are hard and all that stuff. So Drake's done a very good job on that kind of. Um, Although again, if you get to any like grown up hardcore hip hop fans, they'd be like, nah, Drake sucks. Post Malone sucks. But Drake has done a great job hitting that same sort of like he can connect to people from different backgrounds and that's how you get on the top 40. That's how you sell out arenas and all that. But anyway, so speaking of kids, we can move on to our parenting segment, which is kind of our last real segment. So Jeff, this week or even today, my daughter is kind of learning that she can try to throw the ball for the dogs and they'll go chase the ball and then bring it back.
Oh,
So
yes.
he's like, this is cool. But, a 14-month-old doesn't have neither the strength nor the coordination to actually throw a ball. So she kind of like, she'll make a motion and then just kind of drop the ball towards the ground. So today we were kind of trying to play with her and show her. My sister was over and with Amanda, we had this ball out and it's like kind of this like spiky plastic, like soft plastic ball. And we were trying to like throw it towards her and then kind of show her how to throw, like do the motion. It was kind of big, so we are trying to show her like two hands to throw it. And she kept kind of doing this motion where she just kind of was like serving it on a platter, like kind of underhanded, like she'd like stick her fingers out, like her hands out towards you, but like them tied together, and then the ball would just kind of roll off the tip of her fingers. And so I was like, that's pretty funny, I'm gonna try to like do what she does back at her. And I'm expecting it to kind of lightly toss over at her. And I do this kind of wrist flick, and it just comes super fast off of my hands. I'm about 4 feet away from her, walks right in the cheek, bounces off. She's looking at me like, what the hell is going on? The little spikes on the plastic ball make little dots on her face. I'm thinking, oh God, like what am I? Amanda's like, why did you throw it that hard? I'm like, I didn't
I
know.
didn't mean to.
I didn't know. Like when she did it, it just rolled off her fingers. I thought that's kind of what it was going to do when I did it. Like I didn't know it would kind of projectile towards her face. So I'm expecting some Dad of the Year trophies for that, for throwing a ball at my child's face directly from a short distance away. She did not cry. She didn't. She was a little in shock. Uh, she was a little stunned and she didn't quite know what was going on. But she probably won't remember it, which is one of the best parts about having a 14-month-old.
Oh, that is honestly the best part about children is that they are so resilient. Like no matter how badly we screw up, they pretty much always recover.
Right.
So that's always the best part is that, they, whatever it is that we've done, even if we're just, being a jerk or whatever, like it just, they just are like, you know what, I still love you, Dad. And That's always really nice. So I don't have any great stories from this week. I do have a story. The best I can probably do is yesterday we were going to drive out to Mount Rainier. Now we know that Mount Rainier is mostly closed right now
Right.
because of the government shutdown. So, but we had a gift certificate for the Copper Creek Inn, which if anybody, if you've never been out to Mount Rainier National Park and you are planning on doing it at some point, and you plan on going into the Nisqually entrance, which is the one on the other side of Ashford, that all the climbers go in, and you head up to Paradise. Um, there's a little lodge and restaurant about 2 miles outside the gate called the Copper Creek Inn. And their food's excellent, but the thing they are most well known for is a blackberry pie, and it is easily the most heavenly, delightful blackberry pie. And so we had a gift certificate we were going to use, so we took the kids out there. Well, the other thing, they serve a really good breakfast, so we're like, okay, we're going to go out there and have breakfast on a Monday, and we get out there and discover that their winter hours are they don't open till 11, and we get out there at 10. And so we're like, well, crap. So we go ahead and drive up to the mountain, and we think, we'll find a little trail and do a little hike, and just kill some time that way. And so we went ahead and did that after talking with the two rangers who were not being paid and telling us at the gate that, well, because of the shutdown, we are not authorized to collect payment. So here you go. You can drive up to Longmire, which is about 6 miles in, and you can't drive any farther past that. So anyway, so we go to this trail and we start walking, and then I suddenly remember that I knew we had been on the trail before, but I hadn't really thought about how long it had been. And there's a part of the trail where it has a tree that's kind of hollowed out on the inside. And so we had the boys. I just had a faint recollection of having the boys at one time stand inside the tree and take a picture. And so so we did it again, and then it took me probably half the day to find the other picture, but I finally did. Picture was from 7 years ago, so of course this is not great podcasting because you can't see it, but maybe I'll try and put the two pictures up on the website where our podcast resides. And but as a parent, like, it was just kind of one of those fun moments to compare these pictures side by side of the kids, 7 years later standing inside the same tree. So not really a funny moment, but kind of a nice sentimental moment. I'm sure there are a lot of parents out there that kind of get the same deal when they see pictures pop up from years ago or whatever. So it was pretty cool.
Very cool, Jeff. I'm always jealous of, like, you'll see these parents that, like, took a picture of their kid in, like, the same position, like, every day for years or whatever. I'm like, oh, never thought of that. And also, I know that I would never stick to that. Like,
Yeah.
oh no, I forgot. I forgot the last 3 days, so I'm just now, let's bag it. I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so it's cool when you can kind of go back, take some pictures. I actually have a somewhat similar story. I try to always make it up to yearly the Chuck's Hop Shop in the Seattle Central District, their anniversary party, which is always in kind of mid to late January. Whenever they have the weekend, they can get so they bring in a lot of beers from out of our distribution network, out of state. And they'll save up some of the best beers, from the Seattle area and put them on tap, like, for that event. So, like, they always have this great event, and so last year we took, you can bring kids and dogs and stuff into Chuck's Hop Shop, and so last year we took B, and she was about 2 months old, and she was in this harness that was for correcting her. She had a hip dysplasia issue, and so they took a picture with me with my beer holding B. She's kind of like a little more than a houseplant at that point. And so this year I brought her back, and just totally different, obviously. Brought her up. It was just me, and I met her uncle, Amanda's brother, and some of his friends up there, which is always nice to have that sort of, like, backup with the kid when you're out on your own. She, of course, when we arrived at the bar, had vomited up her breakfast. So I got to wipe her off, and in the middle of the street in Seattle, just kind of like wiping off, like using 1,000 wet wipes to just kind of get everything off of her, and then she kind of had the faint smell of like stomach acid, which if you drink enough sour beers, which they had a lot of sour beers on tap, it's it kind of blends in fine with what people were drinking there, so I didn't feel too bad. But so we get in, and I made sure to take a similar picture with her in my arm and a beer in hand. And so I'm thinking maybe every year we'll go back, and I'll take a picture with her at the Chuck Stop Shop Central District anniversary party, and maybe I'll have a nice little story, after 10 years, and something I can embarrass her with.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and that's a pretty easy one to do. That doesn't require a heck of a lot of commitment,
No.
like some other things might.
Yeah, I mean, because if I want to go to that event, and usually I'll just have to bring the kid. I can't just leave the kid at home. So Amanda was working that day, so it was like, well, I got the kid with me. I got the kid with me, so she's going. Like she's
Oh, well,
allowed. If you have
that's
if you're into drinking craft beer, like if you find a place that allows the kids, like you jump on it. Like that's where you go. Like especially in Seattle where that's kind of limited, or the Seattle area. So yeah, and you'll notice whenever there is a place, it's just like swarming with kids. Like,
And I also think that's the best way to parent, to be honest, is, I mean, you have kids and they become part of your family,
right.
and so you just, you bring them into the fold of the things that you do. And obviously certain things get limited. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But, you bring them into the things that you do, and you bring them into your life, and, they learn to appreciate those things. And, you learn to spend time together. Joshua still likes to tell people about the time that I took him to the tap room, and and I got a beer, and he got a Sprite that was actually in a glass bottle.
Ooh.
And so, the bartender had to like pop the top for him, and he just thought that was the coolest thing. So he got to sit down and have his Sprite, and I had my beer. And he still will tell people about the time that he went to the beer place with Daddy. And I was like, well, so then I try to explain it, because sometimes I get, as Craig has mentioned, I am a Christian, and so sometimes I get some sideways looks from people, and I just kind of go, well, I had the beer, and he had a soda, and
Yeah, a whiskey.
maybe,
Actually,
yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you don't approve of having him in Satan's den to begin with, but I promise you, he did not touch any alcohol. So,
well, I'll say, and this is kind of some preaching here, but I think it's fine to show your kids that alcohol is something that it can be taken in moderation, instead of them always getting the message that like alcohol always damages everything. Like if they see this as a sort of a casual thing, maybe they won't think it's such like this evil thing, and which can have of course, the opposite effect when they're a teenager of like, oh, you're not supposed to do that, so I'm going to do a ton of it, or when they go to WSU or whatever, like so. I'm a big believer in kids seeing you do something like that. That's an adult thing in moderation, and kind of learning that you can do those things in moderation, and they can just be something that's a social thing, or something for fun, rather than alcohol isn't just for getting super drunk.
yeah, and given that so much of parenting seems to be like looking at your parents and being like, I am not going to do that, right? I am a product of that very thing, and so yes, it's very important to me that my kids don't grow up thinking that all of these things are evil, and that they see that it's okay to have a beer or two, or maybe even three, but maybe not 10. And so it's like that's something that I'm committed to with them, is just sort of saying, look, yeah, we can be there are certain things that are for adults, and we can be responsible, and someday you'll be old enough to make your own decision on that. And who knows if that's right, and who knows if that's going to keep my kids from abusing substances. But I do know that in my life, my parents shouting at me that alcohol was evil and it will ruin you didn't exactly keep me away from it. So I think I'm trying to avoid that strategy.
Right. Yeah. So now that we're firmly on our pedestals.
That's
Uh,
right. We're gonna have to climb down off our soapbox now.
Climb down, try not to trip. because they're pretty high up. Uh,
That's right.
so, dude, I have a 14-month-old. I know everything about parenting, all right? Come
That's right. You
on.
are now an expert. We are
Yeah.
all experts. Every
Yeah.
last one of us.
All right, so we'll kind of begin wrapping these things up anywhere. I like to sort of end every podcast, Jeff, with this podcast sucks. Do you have something better to listen to?
Yeah. So this week I was listening to Hoop Vision, which is
Ooh.
a podcast from a guy named Jordan Sperber. And he is a name that probably a lot of people don't know, but he's a college basketball analytic type. I first became aware of him. I don't even remember how many years ago it was, but it was probably 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 years ago, something like that. But he was a guy who won basically a contest that Basketball Prospectus and a number of other analytic-minded basketball people put on, and they basically said, "Hey, come at us with your best basketball analysis," and they basically did it like almost like an American Idol type format, where they got this like panel of judges, included people like Ken Pomeroy, like Kevin Pelton, who some people might know from ESPN. So like all these like really just smart basketball analytic dudes. Well, this guy won. I think they did it twice. He won one of them. And so I've, had the occasion to message with him a little bit right after that happened. And anyway, super smart dude. Spent the last 3 years actually coaching, doing video analysis and analytics for, I believe first, I'm drawing a blank on where he was first, but I know the last couple of years he was at Nevada, working with Eric Musselman. And then this year he decided to kind of leave that and then kind of do his own his sort of his own consulting thing, I think. But it also involves a podcast. It involves a weekly YouTube video, and also involves an email newsletter. So I subscribe to all of them. Really, really smart guy. In fact, he did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, or about a month ago, around Christmas time, about the transfer quote epidemic in college basketball. And he looked up some data from the NCAA and to kind of try and put some real numbers to these transfers that people think are just sort of this, again, epidemic. And the numbers were sort of surprising in terms of where guys actually land, whether they go up or down or lateral moves. Anyway, you should listen to it. It's Hoop Vision. And if you want to listen to the transfer epidemic, I think it was, I don't know, December 23rd or 24th. So really good listen. I think it'll educate you a little bit about transfers and why they happen in college basketball and what the reality is in terms of just the overall picture versus what sort of the perception is. The one big stat, I'll just throw this out here and you can go listen to it, but 54% of kids who transfer from a Division I school transfer to a lower level of basketball. So they either go to Division II or junior college or the NAIA. So 54%, over half, actually leave Division I altogether, which is kind of a wild stat. So yeah, go listen to him. He's a smart dude. He'll make you smarter about basketball, smarter than listening to us for sure.
Yeah. We kind of dip our toe into some of the stuff that he talks about. But if you liked that earlier segment about rebounding margin, he's kind of a next level of that. So my podcast this week is I would hope a lot. So I'm going to ride the company line, the SB Nation company line here. So one of my all-time favorite just writers, period, is Spencer Hall. And I think, Jeff, you think that too.
Yeah.
He's just a phenomenal storyteller, writer, hilarious individual. But so actually a restrained version of him, but also kind of more, it's also still pretty on brand with him, is a podcast called It Seemed Smart. And it's an SB Nation produced podcast. Basically, they take one event every episode and dive into it, talk, and it's always something that probably turned out bad or maybe should have turned out bad, and they got lucky and it didn't. He goes into topics like the first Tour de France, which was really funny. Like we dive into it, and he's talking about this guy who did the Cannonball Run and set the record. In Albert Bell's infamous time he got accused of having a corked bat. And those are just some of the examples of some of the topics. And so he just takes, I think it's about 30 minutes each episode. They did about six episodes. So it's really not, it's something you can kind of consume pretty quickly and pretty easily. I listened to most of it just like doing housework one weekend. And it's just Spencer Hall telling the stories. He gets Holly Anderson, and who's another writer, in on one of them. I kind of wish she was on all of them because she's really funny as well, and the two of them have a really good dynamic. They both have written for a website where Spencer, they both kind of, I think, got their fame began, which is everydayshoulldbesaturday.com, which is an SB Nation site as well now. And so it's a really enjoyable, it's just one, especially if you like those podcasts that just kind of dive into a topic each week and just kind of pick at it, and it's pretty great. And so I highly recommend. It's called It Seemed Smart, and obviously you can find that anywhere. And speaking of finding podcasts anywhere, Jeff, you've been doing some legwork, and where are we available now?
Yeah, so you can find us on iTunes. You can find us on Google Play if you have the Google Podcast app. You can find us on Spotify and
Stitcher,
I think, also.
Yeah.
And then also if you have our website is hosted, the website for the podcast is hosted on Podbean. So Podbean also has its own podcast player. So if you have the Podbean app, obviously you'll be able to find us there on Podbean. So yeah, you can pretty much at this point you can find us anywhere that you for just about any app that most of you would use. And I know that if you use something like Overcast and you're on an iPhone, that's what I use. Now that it's in iTunes, it should show up in the directory on Overcast. So you should be able to find us wherever you find your fine podcasts, wherever fine podcasts are sold, right? And you can subscribe and be one of our literally dozens of listeners.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how many come back. This week, but yeah. So if you want to just have the podcast kind of randomly show up in your Twitter feed, you can follow my Doug Craig Powers Twitter. I think I tweeted it out a couple times this week. And then if you like pictures of my baby and my dogs and beer, you can follow me at Craig W. Powers on Instagram. If you can guess what the W stands for, I'll mention you on the next podcast. And then, I think we coming in about the same amount of time. I really thought we were headed to a shorter podcast for a while there.
I did too.
But yeah, so that's all we got for you this week, and we'll be back next week with more WSU basketball, politics, and everything else you hate. Thanks.
Thanks for listening.